Hi, I'm Ben. Welcome to my book corner. Today we're reviewing Crawl by Edward Lorn. This is described as an extreme horror. Came out in 2014. It's a novelette, which love that term. Only 50 pages long, so we're going to touch on the story, the characters, the world building and presentation for my final thoughts at the end as normal. Probably be quite a quick one, this one. I actually, as a side note, read this for the first time actually on stream over at Twitch, so I will be uploading that on here at some point as well. I will be doing some more live readings over there, so I will leave links down below. If I'm streaming, come say hi. But let's just jump straight in. The setup of the story is relatively straightforward. You have the two main characters, Judith and Colt, who are husband and wife, and they're driving to Judith's mother's house. It's a trip from Alabama to Georgia. And basically, the wording in the book itself is Colt was caught sticking his dipstick in another Buick's engine, which I love that terminology, and there's terminology like that all throughout the book. And basically, he was caught cheating with a dog sitter. And the first half of the book is very much detailing the journey that they're driving along, and their sort of interplay and their sort of almost arguments in this very frosty atmosphere that's between them, as you'd expect. On the way, they end up finding a car that's basically mirroring their movements in front of them, and it has a number plate that basically, it's a vanity plate, I believe it's called in America, and it kind of reads as Jesus saves, and then there's a bumper sticker next to it saying, but I do not. A little bit freaky. They speed past it. A few hours later, they end up at like a roadside diner, and the car's there again, even though they've not seen it overtake them at any point. And they bump into a guy who's wearing priest-like vestments, but they're like a deep red colour, but does still have the priest collar. Feeling unnerved, they get in the car they drive on, they hit a bank of really bad fog, and they get involved in a car crash. And then the story very much focuses up on Judith, as she ends up really badly injured in a situation she doesn't want to be in. The Red Priest is there. There may or may not be something in the trees and the bushes where she's ended up sort of being bound, for want of a better term. I don't want to spoil too much. And the advice from the priest for her to get away is to crawl. And then he just leaves the sort of forest clearing, and she can hear something in the bushes. And she sees like a corpse being sort of dragged away. And it sounds like the bones are being crunched, like something's eating them. And then it's the story of her sort of crawling away towards a light in the distance. Then she realises she can hear an engine, and then she suddenly realises that might be the priest. So it's not necessarily going to get better when she gets there. And you sort of have the story of how she's trying to get away and then trying to hide. And then how she tries to deal with the threat. It fits in a surprising amount in the back half of the book in particular, as that's when the horror really, really starts. I would say, and this will touch more on presentation, is that this doesn't really feel to me like an extreme horror, if I'm completely honest. But I really enjoyed the story as a whole. I thought it was really, really strong. So on to the characters. You really only have two characters in this. There's a couple of little ones that sort of flit in and out, with the exception of like the religious type character, who doesn't get a huge amount of actual sense of what his motivations are, or if he's a genuine religious person. So he's deliberately kept quite ambiguous, and I think that helps the story, but you do get a real sense of who Colton and Judith in particular are. The story is told from Judith's point of view, and you get like a really interesting inner monologue, which kind of, when you're reading it, doesn't quite line up with her actions towards her husband. And that kind of makes sense, because her inner monologue's going, I'm going to show him I still love him, I want to do this. But then the way she's acting to him is actually really passive-aggressive, as he, is deserved in this situation. And from Colton's point of view, you get the frustration and the guilt and how that's overflowing and how he wants to fix this. And he genuinely regrets what they've done. And there's enough here to suggest that a lot of this is down to a breakdown in communication between the two. Judith clearly felt that she had done everything that she needed to, whereas when you get bits from Colton, it feels like that she was a lot more distant. So you have an interesting variation on perspectives there. And the way that Judith reacts when everything starts to go horribly, horribly wrong actually makes complete sense for her character and what she's trying to do, and sort of the voices in her head, because that has a bit of a turnaround as well. So for the amount of space in this novelette, the character work is actually really, really good. Whereas the character work is really, really strong, the world building is actually really, really slight. There's minor little callbacks in their history to sort of flesh out their specific world, and bits and pieces around sort of the roads they're going along and how well they actually know the roads, and a little bit of looks at like gas stations or petrol stations, and also like the diners that they end up in as well. Well, there's not a huge amount here. The descriptions of the locations they end up in is very, very strong, but this isn't a title that needs a great deal of world building, but the little bit that is in here does help inform the story and is really necessary for the story to make sense. Presentation then, and what I really like about this is the use of language throughout the title. The character sort of dialogue is very, very sort of salty at times. There's a lot of swearing in here, but it all makes sense for the characters and the situation they're in. It doesn't feel forced at any point, and you really get the sense of sort of anger and frustration when it's being used. There's a lot of sexual innuendo in here as well, and some of it is really, really clever and, you know, was actually quite witty, which I really, really appreciated. The flip side of this is that this describes itself as an extreme horror, and a lot of the extreme horror that I have read tends to be a little bit more explicit in sort of the descriptions of gore, injuries, and locations, so on and so forth, and this doesn't have that. This very much builds tension by being a lot more suggestive in its descriptions. You get an idea of what certain things look like, but it's never made explicit as it is in, say, the splatterpunk books, for instance, and I think that really helps the creepy nature of the title and sort of the ambiguous nature of the various threats that are in here. So I think actually in many regards the presentation of the world and everything in here really does help elevate the work. Another thing to note is the pacing. The first half of the book is just them driving down the road, sort of talking to each other or arguing with each other and the inner monologue. Just the odd little thing to sort of foreshadow what will happen later on down the road, and that's really good. And even when everything goes horribly wrong after the car crash, the pace is still not ridiculously fast, which this feels like a longer novel than it actually is, and in this case this is a really good thing because it's only 50 pages long, but it feels like it fits a lot more in there. So I really appreciate the way that this has been written, paced, and built in general as a novelette. So my final thoughts on this: I actually really enjoyed this. I read it for the first time on stream. There wasn't anything too shocking in here, even though it is classed as extreme horror, which is the only sort of caveat that I would mention. But I thought the level of suspense in here was quite well done, and it had a real human element as well. It's on Kindle Unlimited, so if you want to check it out, you can get it through there, just a mention of that. But this is a good 50-page atmospheric little horror story, and I really enjoyed it. But have you read any of Edward Lorn's stuff? If you have, and you have any recommendations, let me know in the comments below. I'll catch you all next time.